Well, Paul, you've had a fascinating career, which has, dare I say, lurched from land to sea. So much of your time has been spent both as a professional farming and writing about farming, getting to grips with the land, and then by way of contrast, the sea is a big, big thing in your personal life and in your professional life. Yet you were born in Sheffield, which is fair distance from the sea. How did the sea grab your imagination and when?
Well, it depends. It depends if you believe in the old adage that it's all in the blood. Uh, because on my mother's side, all her ancestors were fishermen on the east coast of Yorkshire, all sailing out of Bridlington doing inshore fishing, and they served on the Bridlington lifeboat. And so, if you believe these things are in the blood, then that's where that came from. The farming is uh, slightly more difficult to understand. Um, but I did slightly resolve it several years after I'd started because I was doing a strange farming experiment. I became very interested in the culture of the working horse and wanted to try it myself. So I collected together three mighty Suffolk punchers. I live in Suffolk, and they're the native cart horse of this part of the country. And I was taught how to plough and sow and reap and mow, and I was really taken with it. And one day I was ploughing, and my mother just happened to stand on the edge of the field. And she said to me, "Did you know your grandfather used to do that?" So, so I'm afraid I've got
Yeah.
very mixed up blood, and that's where it all comes
There
from.
you go. I'm trying to imagine the moment though in which you had your first little trip out on a boat. Was it like a pleasure boat on a river or something? Is there a moment at which you would say yes, it all goes back to that?
I'll tell you the precise moment it all goes back to. I was working as a very young radio reporter on a brand new program which had just started on Radio One. People don't looking at this decrepit figure; they cannot believe he was once on Radio One. But it was a news and current affairs program called Newsbeat. The BBC decided it wanted to introduce news and current affairs to younger people. I was invited to be a reporter. I'd been working in local radio until then, and New Year's Day, always a very, very thin day for news and events and so on. And the editor said, "Why don't you go down to Earl's Court? The boat show's on. Go and find a story." So I picked up my portable tape recorder, went down to Earl's Court to this vast boat show, knowing nothing whatsoever about boats or boat shows. And I looked around, and there was a huge picture, almost the size of a mural, of a small sailboat heading towards the horizon. And I can remember this absolutely captured my imagination. So I thought, perhaps I'd like to do that sort of thing. And I sniffed around and looked at boats, and eventually uh, I bought a boat at the boat show for not very much money. It was very, very small, and it was a completely the wrong kind of boat for going across open seas. But anyway, uh, I bought a boat, but I didn't get a story. But although I was
It's your
forgiven and my
story. It
career
should have been your
survived,
story.
my career survived that.
Yeah, but I mean, we leap ahead to the biggest challenge that you've had on the ocean waves. I mean, just very briefly, tell us the story of crossing the Atlantic pretty well on your own, I think.
Yes, well, not pretty well, entirely on my own.
Oh,
I did the famous race from Plymouth, England, to Newport, Rhode Island in the USA, and that was 3,600 miles I sailed on my own over a period of I think 31 or 32 days. But that was not the longest of my adventures. 10 must be, I guess, about 10 years ago now. I took my boat down to Cape Horn, which I always thought was a fascinating place, an iconic headland, one of the great turning points of the world. And I sailed down there with crew for part of the way. But the entire voyage was, I think, about 18,000 miles, the round trip. And I sailed 11,000 of those miles on my own. So those are the those are what you might call the big trips. There've been lots of little trips, like a quick flit to France to buy some cheese or something like that.
yeah.
But those are the big ones.
but probably the most naive and boring question of them all. But if you could encapsulate what it is that sailing gives you, what is it? Why is it such an obsession with you?
It fulfills the curiosity which I remember feeling when I saw that big poster at the boat show of the little boat going over the horizon. I always want to see what is over the horizon. And that seemed to me an appealing way of doing it, by getting onto a boat and heading towards the horizon and seeing what is on the other side. I think that is at the root of it. I'm not a sportsman in any way. When I entered the single-handed transatlantic race, it certainly wasn't with the idea of winning it. In fact, I think I came last, if my memory serves me correctly. But that doesn't matter. I go for the adventure, for sailing over the horizon to see what's there.
Yeah, well, it's not a bad metaphor for interviewing in a way. You're curious about what somebody's going to deliver you on their personal horizon. Is that a bit of a stretched metaphor? But let's say
I don't think it is, actually, because I think the secret of good interviewing is curiosity. It's not a question of sitting down and thinking of clever questions to ask and then firing them. It's having someone in front of you and just being curious about who they are, what they are, and what they want to say. Curiosity, absolutely essential ingredient.
Yeah. Okay. So that brings us to the project in which you're engaged at the moment for Trinity House. For viewers of this around the world, we better explain what Trinity House exists to do
Yeah.
over many centuries.
Yeah, Trinity House is a very ancient organisation, founded in 1506, when it was given a royal charter by King Henry VIII, the famous King Henry VIII. And he was very worried that his ships, which he was amassing in order to try and fight off the French, they were running aground, running into the shore, incredible loss of ships, loss of life, and so on. And so he charged this organisation called Trinity House with providing navigation marks, principally at that stage in its history, around the coastline of the English Channel, and in particular the Thames estuary. It started as a sort of Christian fellowship, I think, and it was constituted as a brotherhood. A lot of people find this difficult to understand. It was constituted as a brotherhood. There would be elder brothers who would be what you might call the board of directors, under a master, and the master is currently the Princess Royal, and then there's a deputy master who's effectively the CEO. But then there are the younger brothers, of which I am one, and the younger brothers are drawn from the wider maritime community. I always call it, I think they get a bit cross when I say this, I sort of call it the Elder Brothers Supporters Club. But there are people, there are ships masters, there are harbour masters, there are people in maritime insurance, people in salvage, shipbuilders, engineers, and yachtsmen. And that's how I became part of it. I'm very proud to be so.
Right. So we need to talk about this project that you're engaging with, and this involves lighthouse keepers. And we need to then get you to tell us the story of what's happened to the traditional lighthouse keeper.
Let me tell you how this came about. I started, getting to know people in Trinity House and talking to them. And I suddenly realized that the last lighthouse keeper in the UK was made redundant in 1995. Well, if you were made redundant in 1995 and you were into your 50s or your late 50s, which was quite likely, I'm afraid by today, there was a good chance you were going to drop off the peg. And with you went all your memories and all your stories of your time as a lighthouse keeper. There are no lighthouse keepers any longer. So I said to Trinity House, you do realize, don't you, that a vast amount of knowledge and experience is simply being lost here? And they said, yeah, okay. Well, what do we do about it? Well, being essentially a journalist and reporter, I said, well, look, why don't we collect this stuff? Why don't we just make sure we have it so that future generations will know what it was like? Books have been written true. But to hear the people themselves speak is, it is a most incredible bonus. So anyway, they have embraced the idea with great gusto, and so I've spent the last year really digging out old lighthouse keepers, and not just lighthouse keepers, I might add. It's the chaps who used to serve on the lightships, the engineers, the people who worked on the tenders which supply them and keep them going. So it's really the broad range of Trinity House's activities.
Yeah. So the challenge for any oral history, well, many oral history projects is actually locating the people to interview. So presumably
Yes.
Trinity House were very helpful there because they would have had contacts with former lighthouse keepers.
Yes. I'll tell you what's very, very interesting about the way this works is that someone will suggest someone to you. You ring them up and you say, I'm doing this thing called Trinity Voices as a project for Trinity House. Would you like to sort of capture some of your memories and experiences? And they say, yeah, I'll do that. So they sort of, in a half-hearted way, agree to it. And then you go and see them. And then they say to you, you sit down there with your recorder and they'll say to you, I don't think I can remember much. I don't think I've got any stories to tell. And then as soon as you switch the machine on and ask the first question, out it all pours. Memories that they didn't think they had resurface. But then the next stage of it is a few days later, one of their mates rings you up and say, "Oh, Ted was on. You interviewed old Ted for the thing. Well, I could tell you all about the day that da 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 da," and that's how it all works. So it takes a bit of a while to get going, but once it gets going, the nice thing is that it tends to feed off itself, and that's been one of the interesting aspects of it, actually.
So the overall scope, I mean, point of detail, how many lighthouse keepers do you think you will have interviewed by the end of the project? Is there a target number?
No, there isn't a target number really. I mean, it'll keep growing because experiences are being created all the time, and I will work my way down to the younger people who are now working in Trinity House, so that their contemporary experience is recorded. But of course, there's a bit more slack in them because they're all in their 30s and 40s and not in their 70s, 80s.
Yeah, but again, a point of detail. Do these people that you interview, do they have to sign a consent form for the interview, and a consent form that embraces how you're going to use it, or do you not do that?
Yeah, we did that. We did discuss the legal points of this. These days, I think consent forms are quite important. It's very short. I think it's one paragraph. I agree to this interview, and I agree to let you use it. So I do that, and no one so far has refused to sign.
Yeah. But if somebody came along to you, a year from now or 10 years from now and said, "I'm not sure I want that still to be in the archive," presumably just because you've signed a consent form doesn't mean that you wouldn't accede to that request, presumably.
No, I don't. No, we're not a police force. Yeah, if people really don't want to use it, we wouldn't persuade them otherwise.
So then, do you go in? Because you've got your vast knowledge of sailing and your vast knowledge of Trinity House, do you go into each interview with a question brief in hand, or just do
I always start in exactly the same point. That might not be how it ends up in the final piece, but I always start with the first question. Now, can you just tell me how you actually came to be a part of Trinity House? And that sort of gets them going. And then you listen very carefully to that. And you hope that you hear something there which will take you down a path. I was editing last night a keeper I went to see. And I sat him down there in his house in Bristol. And I said, "Now, tell me, how did you come to be a part of a Trinity House?" He said, "Oh, God, I never wanted to be. I never wanted to be part of Trinity House. I wanted to be a fine artist." And sort of, "Oh, right, you can go from there." And then he told me the story about how he used to go up his lighthouse, and at the top of the lighthouse, where the light is, quite often birds fly into it. These things happen, and they stun themselves, and then they drop onto the little platform around the outside of the lighthouse. He used to go and pick them up and then paint their portraits. And he became a hugely respected ornithological artist and lighthouse keeper. But that sort of all came from just a casual remark in his first answer. You've got, I'm sure you tell all interviewers, you have to listen to the answers and pick up anything, the slightest thing. It's like the way dogs sniff for bits of biscuit or something like that. You've got to sniff the answers and try and find a new path to take.
Yeah, well, you've latched onto the idea of storytelling there, Paul. I mean, obviously, you have a responsibility to collect, as it were, factual information, but it's stories that really do bring such interviews alive, isn't it?
I think so. Yes, I mean, the structure of stories has been uh, examined and analysed over many books, many theses, and many years. But the structure of story hasn't changed all that much. Beginning, a middle, and an end. And just to take the story of that particular keeper, he was a wayward lad, and he was just looking for a job, and he ended up on a lighthouse as a frustrated artist. And we go through his story over a period of about 15 or 20 minutes, his story of how he incorporated his art into his lighthouse keeping. And then when he was made redundant, he went to be a bus driver. And I thought, oh, that's sad. That's a sad ending. And so I sort of slightly suggested that to him. He said, oh, no, not at all. It's very much like lighthouse keeping. It's a service. It's about safety. It's about ensuring people's safety and so on. So, that's within that 50 minutes, there is the arc of a story, which takes this young wayward lad to find his sort of salvation, if you like, through art on his lighthouse. And then he drives a bus from which he gets an equal satisfaction. Lovely story.
Love that. You sort of mention at length there. I mean, how long do you think you can sit opposite somebody and keep plugging their memories? I mean, people get tired. You get tired. I mean, what's the optimum length?
I find that I sort of keep glancing down at my recording machine, and I think, well, once I've done 35 minutes with them, I'll be able to get 20 good minutes out of that at least. And if I haven't got it by 35 minutes, I get the sense that you're not going to get much more. So that's why I usually call it time.
Yeah. But if somebody clearly has got an extraordinary backstory, extraordinary fund of stories, would you say, well, I'll come back tomorrow or next week and let's keep going while you've got all this? Or have you got to just be practical about this? You cannot keep on going.
No, I keep on. I'm quite happy to keep on going, but I'm very good at sensing when they've had enough. Some of them are quite elderly, and you can sense them flagging a bit. And I think, yeah, they're flagging a bit. They've told me some really good tales. Let's call it a day there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go back, largely because a lot of these people are geographically all over the place. It does take an enormous amount of time.
But you would always go to visit them live, as it were, person to person.
Yes, I would, because I think that makes a huge amount of difference. Yeah.
Yeah. And have you taken any of them to a very evocative location? Have you been able to do that, overlooking a lighthouse? Is that something that you've done?
No, interestingly, as far as I can recall, they all live as far away from the sea as they possibly can. I think they've largely had enough of it. I did one keeper who, when he retired, was given one of the lighthouse cottages at Pendine Point, which is on the north Cornish coast. So that was a sort of done on location, but that was slightly by accident. So no, it's not. I think gathering stuff for an archive is not quite the same as trying to make a feature to go into a radio or a broadcast program. It's a different thing completely. I think the important difference, because all these interviews I could easily have made into a sort of a feature that might have gone on the Today program in the good old days, but I think what you've got to remember when you're doing an archive interview is that you're not creating your platform. You're not trying to mold them to fit into your preconceived idea. It is their platform, and you are there as a facilitator to make sure that they perform on that platform to the best of their abilities. So it's what they say that matters, not what you wish they might say, if you understand the difference.
Yeah. It was interesting. You latched on to the fact that you typically will arrive at a place and somebody effectively is saying, "Well, I don't know if I've got very much to tell you," and then in fact they have got loads to tell you, which introduces the idea of, the benefits to them of delivering this stuff. It's one thing saying it's great for the Trinity House archive and we got this stuff, but how would you describe the benefit to the person who is being interviewed?
What I like is that when it's all over and I switch the machine off, and I thank them very much, they are so chuffed. They are really, really pleased. They're pleased that on several levels, I think they're pleased to tell their story. I'm sure they've told all these stories many times in the pub, but not to a wider audience. But more importantly, it's that feeling that they have not been forgotten. It'll be 30 years since some of them left Trinity House now, some of the older ones, but they haven't been forgotten, and I think they enjoy it. They always thank me fulsomely for coming to see them and letting me hear their stories. So I think that's part of the service I provide, really.
Absolutely so.
I suppose you could call it therapeutic, if you like.
Well, no, that's not a ridiculous way of describing it. I'm sure that's an element of it. You don't film any of these; it's all audio.
No, I don't film them. No, I think there's we live in a multimedia age. Uh, a well-known Radio 4 newsreader, sadly no longer with us, who was a friend of ours, when the BBC went into what was called bi-media, in that television and radio would share soundtracks, and he called it, it's not bi-media, it's by-mediocrity. And you've got to be careful. You've got to be careful. If you start to stretch it too far, everything gets thinned. No, it is an audio archive, and I'm sort of sticking to that.
Yeah. Well, we've reached nearly the end of the story, but the important end of the story is what, of course, certainly in university terms, in business terms, is called outcomes. What's the end result of this? And it's so important to think of exactly how this stuff is going to be stored and how accessible it is to people. So how are you dealing with that in this instance?
Well, the major outcome, is that it's actually been done at all. The fact that these recordings will exist and be kept safe for future researchers to listen to and take note of. But from a practical point of view, they will be available as files to be downloaded from the Trinity House website. Anyone can listen to them. You don't have to be part of Trinity House. Anyone can listen to them. trinityhouse.co.uk. In this day and age, podcasts are the thing. They are ideal as 50 minutes podcasts. They're not going to eclipse Gary Lineker and his podcasts, but they will develop a specialist audience who will enjoy them. I've no doubt about it. So they'll be there forever, or as long as the internet continues to exist, I suppose. But the important thing is that they have been done, that these stories are recorded and not lost, and that's the outcome, really.
I mean, taking you back to the person you first approached at Trinity House and the slight skepticism about this. I mean, you and I both know that there are people who sort of don't get this. They think it's sort of romanticizing, digging back in the past. Why do we need to do this? If you were to give an overarching explanation as to why this is important, okay, you say posterity. What does this really mean? Why is it important to hang on to this stuff?
Because there will be lessons to be learned, and if you don't know anything about your history, I don't think you really know who you are, and I think that is I think that's a huge part of it. Also, I think to be able to appreciate why they're important, you have to have lived a few years. And I can understand why someone, in their youth or early adulthood would think, "Oh, what's this all about?" But when you've lived a few years, you realize how important memories are. I mean, just look at the thousands of books that have been written based on people's memoirs, which have been huge successes. There is a huge appetite for it because it does mean something to have recorded your life, to have recorded your working life and your thoughts and so on. And to be honest, I would encourage anyone to write a memoir. It doesn't have to be a book, but just write it down. I mean, I've got a book here somewhere on my shelves, which is it's a big notebook, which a lighthouse keeper wrote. Just his reminiscence of being on a lighthouse. He's written it down, and it's absolutely magic reading. So the past I always think is part of the present, and that's why I think it's important.
Well, it's been fascinating listening to you, Paul, and so many points of interest there to the budding oral historian. We will look forward very, very much to seeing the archive available online. Good luck with the ongoing interviews. Looks like you'll be doing these until you drop. That's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much.
If I have to climb too many lighthouse steps, I will certainly drop. I can tell you that.
You take care with that. Thanks very much, Paul Heiney.
Great pleasure.